My name is Rosie Goldsmith, and I'm here to introduce you to the latest edition of the Goethe-Institute's Doppelgänger series. It's a great way to find out about the lives and work of Germans and Britons today. Each time we interview two people from the same profession in each country, someone in the UK who's worked in Germany, and a German who's worked in the same job in Britain. Our doppelganger focus today is doctors. How do their roles differ, and how does the healthcare in each country differ? Germany has the oldest national health service in Europe, introduced by Otto von Bismarck in the early 1880s. Bismarck's idea was a form of social welfare to provide equal healthcare to everyone, and to which everyone contributes. It's long been upheld as one of the fairest and most generous systems in Europe. But both the UK and German health services are now going through massive reform brought on by spiralling costs and ageing populations. So how are doctors in both countries reacting to these changes? Daniel Archer is an eminent British cancer specialist known internationally for his specialism in head and neck surgery. He's been senior consultant at two of London's leading hospitals, is on the board of several medical societies, and regularly attends international medical conferences. Daniel Archer, how did you come to work in the German health service?
When I was training in a London teaching rotation, one of the years of our 4-year, what was then called a senior registrar training, was in Münster, in the University of Münster in Westphalia. The link was set up between the then professor who had visited my unit in London and one of the then younger consultants who became a very good friend of the professor, and realised that there was an advantage to be had in young surgical trainees from Britain seeing how things were done in another country. Such many people go to America and around the world, but relatively few people, as you know, go to Europe. And I think it was a pretty good idea to set up what became a 10-year-long regular rotation between London and Münster.
What was the overall goal of your residency in Germany?
Well, to see how things are done differently, and in fact, you also learn how people do things that are better than what we do. You also see how some things aren't necessarily as good as they would be here. And I remember there's this phenomenon in German university and hospital life called the method of the house. And the professor, you will find, will have written a book, and there will be his ideas of how you do operations. And you, in a way, you did them that way. And I can remember one time, I was really getting quite senior in my time there then. I was exploring an orbital flaw for a fracture, and I didn't use the standard incision. And the number 2 professor, who's a very good friend now, and was then, stood behind me and said, "Dr. Archer, you're bad for my blood pressure." And I said, "Professor, you're bad for my blood pressure, and I'm doing the operation." That was regarded as a bit, that was the Englishman being the Englishman, and that was treated with great amusement.
How would you describe the status of doctors in Germany?
Well, they're held in very high esteem. Every element of your professional qualification is, for instance, reflected in your name badge. If you have 2 degrees, you're doctor, doctor. If you're a professor, you're professor, doctor, doctor. And there is great respect for academic qualification, and there is also a great sort of social cachet or there was when I was there, to being a doctor. You were in many ways respected, perhaps out of proportion to that which you deserved. And the expression "God in white" was really quite well known.
Der Gott im Weiß.
Exactly so, yes. And I don't think people took advantage of it, but they were aware that they were accorded rather more cachet than perhaps you would be in England.
Were you envious of the status of doctors in Germany?
Well, I was in many respects, because not just because of the social side, but because they were better equipped. There was better equipment. There was more of it. You could ask for something and it would come. There were downsides. When we scrubbed, for instance, we'd turn an egg timer, and we scrubbed all while the timer was going for much longer than was really necessary, and again to a sort of protocol. And there was one particular theatre sister who if you didn't do it right, would say, "Herr Doctor, unsterile, you are not sterile."
What's the German health service got today that we don't have here in the UK?
I think in a way the doctors still call the shots. If they want to do something, if they want to develop a training system, or they want to do some specific research, then really, once the protocols and so on have been gone through, there's very little resistance or manipulation from outside. Whereas sadly in this country there is a bigger element of management by managers who are not necessarily medical, and not necessarily totally empathic with the aims of the medical practitioners and the nursing practitioners, and in fact, well, what we would call healthcare professionals as a sort of a bigger group.
And what's the difference in training between the two systems?
It's much more didactic there. The training to start with is heavily university based. There isn't really a concept of service provision at a very junior level. You're there to learn what to do. You're there to learn, as it were, the method of the house, how the department handles different problems, and then you are fairly carefully sort of guarded and supervised throughout your training. In Britain, you were shown what to do, and then you did it. And the boss would be there and be around, but you did, particularly at the end of your surgical training, you pretty well ran the day-to-day running of the departments. Whereas in Germany, the professors and the younger consultants, they did the real deciding of what was done.
I lived in Germany for 10 years, and it was great being a patient in Germany. I mean, I could walk off the street and go and see a specialist. I mean, I had great care. It was a time of plenty, really, wasn't it?
I think that's true, not just what we would regard as medical treatment. As you said earlier on, things like massage, going to see what we would sort of regard as physiotherapy side of the physical therapy, and the famous cures. I mean,
the spas.
The spas and the Kurhals, and they were all available as part of a greater health service. Things like leave after illness. I mean, you were given time to rehabilitate. The state took cognizance of that. Whereas really one of the problems we've had is the difficulty of the link between hospital treatment and then follow-up treatment and the management of the patient. And there's a great disjunction, sadly, quite bad at the moment, and that's one of the reasons we have long time waits in A&E, long times for people to be discharged because there aren't facilities properly at home and properly coordinated. That was really very different when I was in Germany. Could
the A&E, the accident and emergency crisis that's happening here in the UK, could it actually happen in Germany?
I doubt it very much. I think there are two big differences. The quality of the intensity of treatment immediately you go into a casualty department in Germany. You saw a doctor, you had a scan, you then saw somebody else. And that really is what the model is now. But this was nearly 30 years ago, and that was quite a marked difference. The other marked difference that in A&E was that the population of people that you saw in A&E were sick, were there for a real reason. They were either a real accident or a real emergency, whereas we tend to have our A&Es filled with social medical problems that perhaps should be manageable in general medical practice.
What's interesting for me, as having been a patient in both countries, is that we all feel very strongly about our national health services. And, we don't necessarily go out and demonstrate on the streets these days, but it is something we feel, both in Germany and in Britain, that we have to defend.
Absolutely. And I think that we have, in a way, regarded it as a social right, whereas the German this is a structural right. It's part of my being, is that I'll play my part, work hard, hopefully modify my behaviours, but you expect the whole package back, not just the emergency and stop. There is a much, I think, better coordinated and rather more seamless transition from presentation to outpatient to inpatient to follow-up, and the follow-up and rehabilitation side of things I think is better organised in Germany.
Do you think that Germans are actually healthier as a result of the German healthcare service?
Yes. They've also got health built into their education system. Everybody knows that you can do this. You can see the masseur, you can be part of the local, the local tennis courts, the local swimming baths. All those things are there in pretty well every small town.
Now, what's the one thing, if you had freedom of choice, you would change in first the German health service and also in the British health service?
I'd like to see more power for the medical staff in the British system and more access to the people that are making the decisions. When I was a young trainee, what the consultant said went, and in fact it was rather a military system, and the management was there really to act as a sort of pay corps, or the guys that provided the infrastructure. Now that's sort of been turned on its head. What I would improve in the German system, one of the big things that I've seen in this country is women doctors, women surgeons. That's still relatively uncommon in Germany. It's improving. Maybe that's the thing I'd like to see, more female surgeons.
Bismarck or Beveridge?
Beveridge, I'm afraid. I think, on the whole, I think our system is more human. I don't mean that at all rudely. It's more sensitive, whereas the German system was exact. In a way, it was relentless. You didn't stop a treatment until you'd finished it properly. Whereas quite often you get the idea here, well, that'll do, and there's a sort of cultural difference there.
Now, Daniel, when you went to Germany, initially you learnt your German at the Goethe-Institut.
Here, in this
and
building.
Here we are in the Goethe-Institut filming this interview. Do you still speak German?
A bit. It takes me a day or two to get going. One of the things that is quite fun is that I learnt the pop songs. Germany won the Eurovision Song Contest in 1982. There was a television series called The Kommissar. And I will quite often, if I go back to Germany or even Austria or Switzerland, and I'm talking about my time in Germany, my jokes are 1982 jokes. And I was at a meeting, I think, in Austria, and somebody came up to me and said, "Doctor, how long were you in prison?" Because it's as if I've been in a time warp away from the German culture. That was really, and that's true.